All right, good evening. My name is Beth Murgatroyd. On behalf of the Cary Academy PTAA Health and Wellness Committee, I would like to welcome you to this evening's conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. Those of you arriving in the wet weather, just come on in. We appreciate you joining us for this hybrid event. Some of you are here in person and many of you are joining us on Zoom. This is a very important topic in adolescent mental health that we're going to discuss tonight, so we're really grateful for your presence. I want to extend a special welcome to some parents from other schools in the Triangle area who have also joined us for this presentation tonight. We're really glad you can be with us. In just a moment, I will introduce our guest speaker, but I wanted to review a few housekeeping items. Dr. Prinstein's presentation will be approximately 45 minutes this evening. And so then we can probably continue for about 30 minutes on Q&A. And a couple of us will moderate the Q&A and we'll make sure that we repeat the questions so you all are able to hear what's being asked, whether you're here in the room or on Zoom. We will try to alternate questions from the room and the virtual audience, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. So we really appreciate your engagement and your patience. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mitch Prinstein. Dr. Prinstein is the Chief Science Officer of the American Psychological Association and the John Van Cedars Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For over 25 years, and with continuous funding from the National Institutes of Health, Mitch's research has examined interpersonal models of internalizing symptoms and health risk behaviors among adolescents, with a specific focus on peer relationships in the developmental psychopathology of depression and self-injury. He has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers and 10 books, including the acclaimed book, Popular, Finding Happiness and Success in a World That Cares Too Much About the Wrong Kind of Relationships, and an adolescent workbook called Likeability. Mitch and his work have been featured in many outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, the Los Angeles Times, CNN, US News and World Report, Time Magazine, Newsweek, Reuters, and many other places. And he also has 2 TEDx talks if you want to hear more from him after this evening. We are really delighted to hear from you, Dr. Prinstein, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me here for this. I've never been at Cary Academy before, and it's beautiful. Even in the rainy day, I can see what a beautiful campus it is and how nice everyone has been in welcoming me. So thank you. None of you should be here. I shouldn't be here either. In fact, if we go back to the beginning of our story, we'll learn that we are but one of several species that were on the planet about 60,000 years ago, and anyone betting on which of these species would survive would not have bet on us. Compared to the other human-like groups that were on the planet at the time, we were not the strongest, we were not the largest, we were not the hardiest, we were not able to withstand severe temperatures or strong combat. But there was one thing that we had, which explains why we are all sitting here today and they are not. And that's a small mutation that we had in our brains and also in our voice box that allowed us to grunt in just a little bit more of a sophisticated way than our other human-like species neighbors were able to, and to comprehend those sounds in a way that gave us the rudiments of language. Well, the reason why that's important is because with language, we became fundamentally a social species. And as a social species, we began to work together in herds, perhaps. Now, of course, working together in herds gave us lots of different advantages. We were able to collaborate and cooperate. We were able to warn one another of predators. We were able to discover tools and hide them and communicate where they were for others. And we really were able to form this sense of connection. There are many different advantages of herd living that we experienced back then. But one thing that it came with was the importance of us staying in the herd. Because if we left the herd, we lost all of those protections and we might be in grave danger. As a result, there's a major disadvantage that comes with that adaptation that occurred so many tens of thousands of years ago. and that is the extent to which we are biologically programmed to care about what other people think of us. A study that was done just about 10 years ago or so looked at the experience of being excluded from others while people were getting their brains scanned in an fMRI. And the way that they did this was they created a game. They called it Cyberball. And you can see here on this slide that the Cyberball game made it appear as if you, with your hand in the middle, were throwing a ball back and forth with two other research participants at the same time. You would be able to direct whether you wanted to throw the ball to the person on the left or the person on the right, until at one point, suddenly, those two people stopped throwing it to you, the participant, and they just kept throwing it back and forth to each other. And in that moment, in that feeling of social exclusion, they were able to discover something that no one expected. And that was the areas of the brain that seemed to be activated during that moment of social exclusion. Well, it turns out that the areas of the brain that were activated were the same ones that seemed to be present during the experience of physical pain. Now, I don't mean the experience, the feeling of burning or physical pain that we were experiencing from the sensory cortex. What I'm talking about instead is a part of the brain that's part of our most powerful alarm signal that we have. It's part of a motivational network. Because think about it, if you were to put your hand in fire, you would not only sense that it hurts, but you would immediately engage in the opposite behavior in order to save yourself from that pain. Well, in the moment of social exclusion, those areas of our brain activate as well and tell us whatever you are doing, do the exact opposite. Make sure that you stay in that herd. Make sure you are feeling socially connected to others. I wanted to provide for you this background as we're about to talk about social media, because we're talking about working with forces that go way, way back before there was ever a smartphone or before there was ever a Facebook, and talk about some of the ways in which we're biologically programmed to care so deeply and our brains to respond so dramatically to the moment at which we might feel that we're losing social connection. Now, I also want to mention that everything I'm talking about is important for adults as well as for adolescents. But adolescents still have a developing brain. And what most people, of course, may not realize is that the adolescent brain does not develop all at once, nor does it develop overnight. It turns out that about a year or two before we see adolescents changing through pubertal development in ways that we can observe in their bodies, their brains at around 11, 12 or so years old are starting to change, particularly from the parts in the back and progressively to the parts in the front, which are not fully developed until around the age of 25, if at all. And we also see that the parts of the brains that are developing start with the more primitive regions, which are inside, and it eventually matures to the part that's more human, the cortex that kind of sits on top of that primitive brain. Well, this is really important because one of the very first regions that's developing at age around 11 or 12 is a center for social rewards. It's called the ventral striatum. It's an area that's filled with dopamine and oxytocin receptors. It makes us really, really want to interact with peers, and it makes it feel really good when we do. Mice are lucky to only experience adolescence for 1 week. But during that 1 week, research has shown that even adolescent mice prefer to spend more time with other adolescent mice than with adult mice during those pubertal years. So we are biologically programmed to learn how to roll our eyes at the age of 11 at our parents, think that they're totally lame, and suddenly want to hang out with peers as much as possible. My daughter is 11, turning 12. Very happy to see her achieve that developmental milestone. So this is why we see that adolescence comes with this dramatic craving to spend so much time with peers. And it used to be that those kinds of peer interactions were happening in person. And peers are the focus of adolescent conversation. Who's talking with whom? Who likes whom? Who is popular? Who's not popular? How can we get more attention and more influence among our peers? As the years progressed, Over so many generations and so many decades, centuries really, we have not seen that change. Adolescents have always been very, very interested in spending time with other adolescents until a very short period of time ago. And now we see a very big change in how it is that adolescents are interacting with each other. Interestingly, although it might not have been the intent at all of people who developed the platforms that so many kids use today, it turns out that the biological vulnerabilities that kids have at exactly the time that we introduced them to technology turned out to be a perfect fit, because now kids have the opportunity to engage with one another 24/7, 365. Today, we're going to talk about when do we want kids to use social media? And knowing that this period of brain development is this year from the beginning of that change in the ventral striatum for the next year, it's the second most important year of brain development in our entire lifespan, the first being age 0 to 1. What do we want kids to be doing on these devices and interacting on these platforms during the second most important period of brain development in their lives? So you've heard a lot about this already. No one's come here today not knowing some of the answer to what we know about social media, but I want to tell you that some of what you know about the effects of technology and social media on adolescent development is incomplete. My job here today is to try and give you as much of the accurate information as I can, while pointing out where some of the information might have been missing by design or accidentally. The reason why is because, of course, there's a lot of interest in this right now from the media. And when media come and talk with scientists, they want answers, they want sound bites, they want quotes, and they want to make a sexy headline that will get your attention as a reader. Turns out, science doesn't have all the answers quite just yet. And even the things that you've heard of so far, in some cases, might deserve some pause and some consideration. I'm going to try and walk you through that tonight. Very briefly, I'm going to mention that any studies that have been done that have examined the contemporaneous association between adolescents' characteristics, let's say their depression, and the amount of time they're spending on screens, and they've asked those questions to kids at the exact same time, makes it impossible to understand the chicken and the egg problem. We need long-term longitudinal research to follow kids and understand what might precede what kinds of outcomes. It's also really important to know that all the research that's done in this area is correlational. We cannot imply causation. The only way we could do that is if we randomly assign some subgroup of kids, kind of clockwork orange their eyes open to stare at social media for years on end, and then saw how they might differ from a group that was kept from social media. Obviously, that would be an inappropriate and unethical study. So we're bound to make conclusions based on correlations. And that's really important to be aware of. Technology changes remarkably fast. In my own work, we've been studying this for well over 10, 12 years, and papers studying Facebook, which is so 2012 now, are just finally getting to the point of publication. Science is a very long and tedious process, and it doesn't go as fast as the news cycle. In fact, research goes very, very slowly, especially when we're trying to understand adolescent development, because we want to study at one time point what they're doing, and then we want to wait for them to grow up a few years, and then we want to go back and figure out how they turned out. Well, by definition, this is going at a much slower pace. So what I'm going to do is talk with you about 9 or so different areas of research and tell you what we know so far, keeping in mind, of course, these limitations to the studies that are out there, and knowing that we're not going to be able to have definitive answers at this point or probably for many years to come. As a parent, I'm presenting this in hopes that it will give you some signals of things to look out for and ways that you can critically evaluate what you hear in the news and how you're making decisions for your own kids. I'm going to start by talking about positive features of social media, and I'm not going to spend that too much time on that, because there are very large companies making a lot of profit that are already doing the job of telling you why your kids should spend as much time as possible on social media. So although that research is there, and I will review it very briefly, I'm going to purposefully spend a little bit more time talking about some of the warning signs that you'll probably want to look out for. Because compared to the companies that have a lot of money and talent to get your kids on social media, it's just you that's going to get them off. So let me spend more time on those latter points. Spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you that social media is evil and you should have your kid avoid it at all possible costs, nor am I going to say to you the reverse. The fact is, life is complicated, data are nuanced, and the ways in which we see effects on adolescent development and mental health really have to do with a combination between who your child is before they even log in and what it is specifically that they're doing once they're on social media. The number of hours they spend on there turns out not to be the important variable. It's what they're doing. So for instance, a resilient adolescent who spends time on social media reading the New York Times or direct messaging their closest friends might be just fine, no matter how many hours they spend doing that. In contrast, an adolescent who might have social or psychological vulnerabilities, perhaps they're lonely, and they might be getting into more of addictive practices or being exposed to harmful stimuli, will clearly have a worse outcome. My job today is to tell you about those child characteristics and those specific online behaviors for you to keep an eye out. Most of what I'm going to talk with you about is based on peer-reviewed, published research, either by our team or other teams around the world who have been studying these questions. But at UNC Chapel Hill, we do have a center that, as of just a couple of weeks ago, actually has been expanded. A very large center now that is going to be focused specifically on answering this question. And as long as we keep it secret, I'm going to show you some data that have not yet been published or peer-reviewed, just so you can get a sense of what's coming down the road. And I'll make a note of when those data are being shown to you. So let's start with some of the positive attributes of social media. There is research that clearly demonstrates that there are a number of youth that are a member of a community, whether it's an interest area, whether it's an identity, whether it's a community of people who share similar values or socioeconomic statuses, that don't feel that they have a home or a connection with others in their offline worlds. Research seems to show that social media can be very valuable and helpful for some of those adolescents to really help them to feel a sense of connection, belonging, social support in social media and online communities. In fact, the level of social support that we all request when we're on social media is very different than it has been for the rest of our lives when we didn't have these devices. If your goldfish passes away, you would probably not go to work and tell everyone that day, I'm sorry, I need you all to know that it's a really hard day for me because of my goldfish, but you would post it online. And if you posted that online, you would likely, within instance, you would get hundreds of responses consoling you on the loss of your fish. We have changed the way in which we communicate, we solicit, and we provide social support to others, and that's a benefit from social media. Research suggests that some kids develop online-only friendships on social media with people they know they will never meet in real life. Maybe they're around the world, in fact. And these online-only friendships do buffer the effects of stress on future negative behaviors like suicidality among those who have attempted before. It's a really important positive. We know that during COVID-19, social media was the only way that kids were able to interact with many of their peers. And now research is starting to come out showing that, in fact, that did provide a really important, albeit temporary, fix for a problem that we were experiencing as a globe. We also see that adolescents are much more likely to develop peer contacts with diverse groups, people that they might not have met in their own communities. And now we have an adolescent population who is experiencing more diversity in their inner circle than maybe any of us experienced as we were growing up. And that's a wonderful positive thing that is coming from the opportunity to have worldwide access to peers instantaneously. Adolescents report that they enjoy social media experiences. Stay tuned. I'll come back to that one in a moment. We also see that adolescents use social media to engage in civic engagement and activism in really impressive ways. Kids are changing the world and they're using the internet to do it, and they're doing it more effectively than we have in a lot of ways. So I think that that's fantastic. And this is something also that we just could not have seen when we were all stuck in our local communities and we had no way of reaching out to people outside. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the ways in which research is showing that there might be concerns with social media use and the things that you might want to be looking out for. And I'm going to start with the one that you've heard all about last summer from the Facebook whistleblower, who specifically talked about research having to do with social comparison. It is, of course, the case that adolescents tend to go online, so do adults, and forget that what they're seeing might be curated posts of people's best lives that's putting together a story of idealized selves that does not represent what we all look like in the morning, what we actually think about privately, or the way in which we want to portray ourselves in the best light. What we find, though, is that while adults have the ability to reflect upon that, kids don't as well. So we find that kids especially are really susceptible to these social comparison theories and experiences. In particular, because when adolescents are going through middle school and high school, they're experiencing what psychologists call reflected appraisal. The idea that what you think of me is an accurate interpretation of who I am as an individual. No stable self-concept. It's if you think I'm good, I must be good. And when you look at posts online and you see that there's a lot of likes or a lot of selfies with people saying that person looks great or not great, they actually believe that this is who they are. As a result, what's happened is that those teens that say that one of the activities they engage in the most when they go online is to compare themselves to others, to their friends, to the most popular kids in their school, to celebrities, or that they post things specifically to try and get feedback, they're at the highest risk. So these are kids that for depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and weight-related behaviors, weight management-related behaviors. We're seeing that particularly among females, but increasingly also for males who are being pushed towards a body image as well. And there's more and more work coming out really demonstrating that that's happening, perhaps not as much as it has for females, but nevertheless, this is something that's affecting everybody. Now, in our class at UNC Chapel Hill, through our center that I was just telling you about, we've been teaching a class on social media since the beginning of the pandemic. We've had hundreds and hundreds of young adults who are UNC undergraduates answer some questions for us, not as part of a research study, but as part of the class. And that's some of the data that I'm going to show you today. We asked these folks who have graduated high school, a little bit older than most of our kids probably, do you really find it hard to compare yourself to others? How hard from stopping yourself from comparing yourself to others, maybe how many friends they have, who the others are friends with, what they're doing. And very, very few young adults say, oh, it's easy. In fact, in young adulthood, they say, no, I still find it a bit challenging to keep myself from engaging in those social comparison processes. In fact, some kids say that it's almost impossible to stop themselves from engaging in that social comparison process. And that's a concern. We really want to teach kids to think about how they could look at the stimuli they're seeing online as an opportunity for entertainment, or seeing how they are looking at others' best selves, these self-portrayals, but most kids are forgetting that that's what they're looking at, and they have to override that instinct to compare themselves to others. I want to move on to talking a little bit about some of the folks that are most susceptible. Interestingly, when we look at the kids who are engaging online and who's having positive outcomes and who's having negative outcomes, although people from minoritized backgrounds tend to find a sense of community if there's not one within the real life or offline world, we also see that people from minoritized backgrounds are facing a remarkably high level of online discrimination or cyberbullying. And the gloves are off when it comes to online experiences, because people can post things anonymously, they can send them out to a much larger group of people, and they can do it without sanctions. So some research has in fact suggested that a remarkably high percentage of kids, here indicating about 2/3 of kids, and it doesn't matter which particular racial or ethnic group somebody's in, are in fact seeing several discriminatory posts either directed towards groups of people or towards individual people based on the identity that they have. This is the case for racial and ethnic minoritized groups, as well as sexual and gender minoritized groups. Research is showing that even after accounting for all of the discrimination experiences that kids are having offline, it's the online experiences that seem to predict bad outcomes above and beyond what's happening. because again, these are not only more frequent, but they're harsher. So we're seeing that this is related to increases in anxiety and depression longitudinally. Again, we asked this question to our own students who are young adults, and about 45, maybe 50% or so said rarely, if ever, they've seen these kinds of posts. But half of young adults were saying, yes, in fact, they do see cyberbullying happening online. In some cases, very frequently, they see that. And this breaks my heart, but when we ask them specifically, have you seen racist posts directed towards a racial or an ethnic group? The majority of kids are saying well over 10 times within just a few month period, they're seeing those kinds of posts. Same thing for those who are, oh, sorry, I have an error here, but the second graph is for sexual and gender minoritized groups. Very, very similar results. Is this the environment that we want our kids to be developing in, to be exposed to this level of posts? We spend so much time to really try and make sure that kids are not exposed to that or bystanders to that in their real life environments, but they actually are getting a lot of that exposure online as well. I'm moving quickly through these because I want to make sure we have a lot of time to go through so much of this research. But another area that's really important to consider that sometimes adults aren't as aware of is the extent to which there are sites, social media accounts, groups, affiliation kinds of networks out there that actually go on to promote dangerous or illegal or harmful behavior. For instance, a few years ago, YouTube, before they had stopped this, let any kind of video up, even those that kind of encouraged kids to engage in non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors or suicidal behaviors. Non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors are remarkably common. The most common is cutting. And a remarkably high percentage of kids, even without any clinical psychopathology concerns before, are reporting that they have at least tried to engage in some of these types of behaviors. What's particularly concerning is that online, there are many, many different stimuli out there that are either exposing kids to these kinds of things or actively encouraging them to do so. So on YouTube about 10 years ago, of all the videos that were out there, these were among the top 50. About 57% or so had no warning to indicate to kids that this might be triggering for them, especially if they were having a hard time. A quarter of them were encouraging kids to engage in cutting and to do so without their parents' knowledge. So actually providing instructions for kids on how to do it, how to hide it, and how to talk with parents about it in a way to, make sure that you are not suspected of doing so. And again, you can see here that about a quarter to a third were reporting that these were sending a mixed message about cutting or actually promoting that behavior. This is based on YouTube about 10 years ago. The extent to which this is happening on brand new platforms that are proliferating so quickly, like TikTok, has not yet been studied, but there's reason to suspect that it's happening even more. These are some images from pro-ana sites, or sites that encourage anorexia-related kinds of behaviors, really talking with people about betraying the anorexia community if you do eat, or you do engage in more healthy eating behaviors, and providing poetry and creativity and support to people who are engaging in very dangerous and unhealthy behaviors. Really celebrating the embracing of this area of clinical symptoms. Are kids ever exposed to this content? Well, about half of the kids are. So in young adulthood, we did hear that about half of kids made it through adolescence without ever seeing these sites. But remember, that means that 1 out of 2 are seeing that. And in fact, a subgroup are getting quite often exposure to these kinds of sites, something very important to talk with kids about directly. Moving on, I want to talk about the interesting experience of peer influence that seems to happen online. This is very clearly happening among adults as well. I'll just briefly mention the mis- and disinformation infodemic, as the WHO calls it, that we're currently all experiencing. But for adolescents in particular, there's a very interesting way in which we see information online. We see that other people have liked the information, that post, or they've commented on it. And we might naturally assume, because our brains are built to try and allow us to make broad conclusions, that one comment must represent a large subset of the population that likely feels the same as that those one or two people that made those comments. or those 20 or 100 people who liked the post. It's a natural phenomenon that we do that. We rarely say, wow, that's one person who had that one comment. I'm sure everyone else thought about it in the same way that I do. We don't think that. Well, adolescents are especially susceptible to that. And really interesting research that was done just a few years ago showed that when adolescents in high school were exposed to posts on their Instagram feeds that were pro-alcohol, and those posts had pro-alcohol comments or likes attached to it, it did, over the course of time, make adolescents assume that their peers were far more favorably looking upon irresponsible drinking than they had thought before. And once they'd adopted that attitude, it made them far more likely to engage in heavy episodic drinking. That's 5 or more drinks, alcoholic drinks on a single occasion. And that process occurred in a matter of moments, but it was directly related to their exposure to these posts. So there's something remarkably powerful about what we see on social media, and now emerging evidence demonstrating that that is changing what adolescents think about the world, their friends' world's views, and in turn, their own behavior. Is this common? When we ask 20-year-olds, I assume that likes and comments represent a whole subgroup of people. It actually takes me a moment to remind myself that it might just be a singular opinion. Most agree. Yes, they automatically make the assumption that what they see, even just from one commenter or a few likes, probably represents a huge swath of their peer group. Again, though, some disagree. So it's important to recognize not everyone is susceptible, but we have to know whether our kids are the ones that are and really help them with that. Another interesting phenomenon that has been coming up recently has been the experience that, that we've been hearing from kids that digital media is actually creating a significant source of stress for kids. Anyone who has a kid using Snapchat probably has heard them talk about the importance of their continuing their ongoing interactions on Snapchat, and they can't leave their phone behind even for a day. It would ruin their entire record of ongoing snaps with other people. Well, psychologists talk about this in a few different ways. Stress comes from sources, for instance, the connection overload, simply getting all of the notifications and the buzzings and the beepings constantly telling you that you have posts, you have things that you posted that were commented on, you have likes. That's happening on all your platforms, TikTok and Snapchat, and it's happening on your Instagram. No self-respecting teens on Facebook, but it could happen there as well. And they're also getting texts. And this is, remember, so concerning for adolescents, especially because they have that very hyper-developed ventral striatum, that area that is telling them that it is very important to attend to all of these things. It feels as if their brains have made them feel that their life depends on it, but they do not yet have developed the prefrontal cortex, the inhibition center, to say it's okay to stop yourself from responding to all of those immediately. This is a significant source of stress for young people. Young people also talk about FOMO. You've probably heard of this, fear of missing out. There's something very cool going on. There's some gossip, there's some interaction, there's some fun time that everyone is having a shared experience with, except for you, because your parents made you take your phone away when you sat down at the dinner table. And it's very hard to not be a part of that. And as a result, that gives kids the experience of stress. Availability stress is the idea that you have to be there at the minute that someone texts you or contacts you over social media. Adolescents, especially adolescent girls, do tend to sanction one another if they do not get responses to their posts as quickly as they should. So if you put up a selfie and your friends don't respond in 10 seconds, say, you look so amazing, that's a bad friendship behavior that you just didn't do that. You might actually get a call saying, why haven't you gone on and liked it already? So this sense that friends have to constantly be available to meet that friendship demand. We didn't have anything like this when we were growing up. There was no 1980s version of a selfie. We didn't walk around with a picture of ourselves and say, do I look hot? Do I look hot? What do you think? Like, this is a brand new behavior. So it comes with a brand new set of consequences and friendship expectations that we can't relate to, but for them, it's very real. And also the sense that if you put yourself out there and you make a post or a comment, oh, people better like that. Because if not, you better take it right down, is the feeling that a lot of adolescents have. So this extent together creates a new stressor for teens, something that none of us had to experience, but actually this feeling of constantly the nagging, the expectations, the desire to be tuned in, the feeling that you have responsibilities, and it's in their pockets all the time. It's sitting 1 inch from their heads while they sleep. This is a significant source of stress for kids. I'm asking our 20-year-olds, have you often felt like you wanted to take a break from your device, but you didn't because you felt an obligation or a pressure to be available to your friends and followers? Half of even these young adults in college say, yes, I have felt that way, but half say no. Once you post something, how likely are you to check in again, specifically for the purpose of seeing whether it's getting some likes and comments? Very few people say, oh, I don't check it at all. I just post it and walk away. Most common people say, I check frequently within the 10 to 20 minutes after posting. So once they put up that post, this is now a 20-minute thing of refresh, 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 constant stress to see what's happening, what's happening. It's a vulnerable moment. You know, they might have spent minutes or hours crafting the post, and now they're spending this time afterwards. So it's stress. Is it a big deal? Well, when we look at this in some of our research that we're doing at UNC, we looked at a sample of 14 and 15-year-olds, almost 700 of them. We talked to them about these areas of stress and we used measures to look at it. About half actually reported that they were experiencing significant levels of digital stress that was getting in their way of doing homework, interacting with family members, eating, sleeping. And this level of stress predicted increases in depression a year later. So this is actually a significant source of stress for some kids.
The no mean that there's no stress or that it's just not significant?
Both. In this case, we had people saying, I never feel that way, although very, very few. And some people say, I feel that way, but I can blow right past it. It doesn't really feel stressful.
I'm getting stressed with you just talking.
I know, right? I have to check my account, yeah. Okay, so we're talking a lot about what happens on social media. It's really important to remember, though, that whatever kids, when they're spending their time on social media, there's something that they're not doing at the same time. There's been some research correlationally really demonstrating that as kids have engaged in social media usage more and more, kids are reading less and less. But I'm going to talk instead about something that kids need to be doing according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and that's sleep. We're supposed to be making sure that kids get 8 hours of, I would love to get 8 hours of sleep, but we're supposed to be making sure that adolescents and their developing brains are getting 8 hours of sleep each night. You can see that in 9th grade, only 40% do get 8 hours of sleep. And by 12th grade, only 20% of kids are getting enough sleep. So generally, way before social media, this is already a very, very big concern. But kids use social media most often during those late nighttime hours. It's when they're unsupervised, they don't have school, they're very likely to be on there from 9 until 1 in the morning if they have nothing checking them. Well, research has actually been able to look at that now. And it's demonstrated that the more there is variability in sleep, it's actually changing the ways that adolescents' brains are growing. What I'm talking about here are structural changes in brain development. So literally how much the brain is growing, what areas of the brain are growing, and are they growing to the full maturity and what's appropriate for neural development in adolescence. And what we're seeing is that the more social media use, the more variability in their sleep schedule. And that variability is actually changing how their brain is developing over time. In fact, a recent meta-analysis or a study of studies showed that over 90% of studies have been able to make the direct link between screen time and poor sleep health, particularly among children and adolescents. So when they need to shut off their lights and go to sleep, it's not just that way you can get a glass of wine and finally relax at the end of the day, but it's because actually it's changing how kids' brains are going to develop and what brain they're going to be able to use for the rest of their lives. So this has been talking about screen time. Some of the studies have looked at social media and not. It seems that the late night hours are more social media, because usually parents say get your homework done first. So, but it's a great question because it's not clear that this might not have something to do with homework in some of the cases. Absolutely. Absolutely. Is social media addictive? Well, the ventral striatum that I talked with you about before is actually the area where we experience that sense of social reward, that dopamine response. It's adjacent to other areas of the brain that I'll talk about in a moment that help us to move forward and seek whatever it is that gave us that pleasurable response. Those areas are actually the centers of where we know that experiences with addiction are connected. So it very much seems likely that there could be an addictive neural kind of tie-in between what we're seeing in the brain and what we're seeing with social media. What we've been able to do recently is we've gone into the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, and we've taken the criteria for substance use addiction, in particular substance abuse. We've asked these questions kind of really are used to diagnose somebody who might need to get rehab treatment for serious substance use addiction. We changed each criterion from substances to social media. So we asked kids, do you ever feel like you spend more time on social media than you intended? Have you ever tried to spend time away from social media, but you couldn't do it? Did you ever expend extra effort to make sure you'd continue to have access to social media at times when you otherwise might not have been able to use it? Do you ever have a craving or a strong desire to use social media? Does social media ever get in the way of things you're supposed to be doing, like sleep, exercise, or schoolwork? Do you ever use social media even after you realize that it was getting in the way of what you thought was best for you? Have you ever been away from social media and felt like you were missing it too much to engage in your normal day-to-day activities? And do you think you may be addicted to social media? We asked these questions to our young adults who have been taking our classes. Percentages are remarkably high. For each and every item, the vast majority of young adults are self-reporting that they would meet the diagnostic criterion for an addictive disorder as related to social media. So we made them get off their phones for a day. We, as a class assignment, we made sure, we asked them if they could opt out, which some did. They said it was too hard, I can't do it. But the majority of the students, as we've taught this semester after semester, have opted in and they have agreed, I'm going to take a tech holiday. I'm not going to log on and using my phone for an entire day, for a 24-hour period. I wanted to share some of those responses. One of the most common responses, which is very interesting, especially when we think about those neural connections that are subcortical, the ones that are beyond our conscious awareness, it just are things we do without having to think about it, is that a remarkably high percentage of adolescents in our class told us, whoops, it was noon before I remembered we had the assignment. I didn't remember because before I knew it, my hand had just reached for the phone, picked it up, and I was 20 minutes in before I realized, oh, we have that assignment. I'm not supposed to be on social media. There's something remarkable about the muscle memory, if you will, the extent to which some of these kinds of social rewards and the neural structures that lead us to follow those drives or the behaviors are even happening outside of our conscious awareness. In the same way we think about how smokers might be smoking before they remember that they're smoking, or people might engage in habits that they don't remember that they have. But some people did get off for the day, or at least the majority of the day, once they realized that. These to me are really important and something that I've been trying to share with adolescents themselves. Throughout the day, I felt happier and productive. It felt good to accomplish all the tasks I had set for myself instead of regretting wasting my time, being lazy and distracted. When I don't have social media as an easy, quick, gratifying use of my time, I found that I actually got around to my to-do list. I played the guitar, I read for pleasure, I went grocery shopping, I called that friend. Not being on social media forced me to communicate with friends. Instead of going on a downward spiral of social media, continuing to let my anxiety and sense of loneliness build up. And one young woman wrote, earlier this year, I was sent to a residential eating disorder treatment. Overall, this experiment acted as a reality check for me. I was not triggered by any of the posts on social media, so I was able to be present instead, which was important to me. Just a couple more. I spend more quality time with my friends instead of hanging out with my housemates, all of us being on our phones. We actually made conversation. throughout the day, I was also able to get much better sleep. I didn't realize responding to texts or even checking for notifications was interrupting my thoughts. Without checking social media, I was able to complete work faster, more understanding of the material. I definitely would like to continue to limit my social media use for the benefit of my sleep schedule, mental health, and grades. It's worth it. After my morning walk, I couldn't scroll. I ended up doing a workout, which made me feel even more energetic and ready to tackle the day. When lunchtime came around, I had completed more work than the day before already. I felt satisfied and proud of myself. I felt happy, content with my day, and not even tired. I was able to spend some time with my sister, kicking around the soccer ball in the yard and our dog for a walk, and I wasn't even missing my phone. At the end of class, we asked kids what age they got their phone and what they wish their parents did. Over 90% of kids tell us, I wish my parents didn't give me a phone before I was 13. So they asked for it, they begged for it, they wanted it. Now they're 20 years old and they're looking back and they're saying, I really wish that I had not gotten it. I wish my parents had not given me one. And with that, I want to talk about social media and brain development. I alluded before to the area of the brain that's connected to adjacent to the ventral striatum. It's called the ventral pallidum. It takes what feels really good and it says, go get more of it. But we don't think out loud, or in our own heads, I'm going to strategize how to get this. We just have what in the English language we might call a drive or an instinct or a craving. And we find ourselves seeking that without even realizing that we're doing it. Contrasting that with the prefrontal cortex, the area that until the age of 25 is not going to be able to inhibit us from following our every desire. Think of it as the brain's brakes. It really makes sure that we're being deliberative and thoughtful and we're inhibiting ourselves from following every possible instinct. It's the part that makes us uniquely human. A study was done looking at adolescents' experiences on an Instagram-like platform while they were in an fMRI. On the platform, they were shown some pictures that were cute and adorable. And when they saw pictures like that, sure enough, there was activation in the ventral pallidum. It made people feel like, oh, I would like to see more of that. I would be tempted to click buttons to request more of those kinds of images. They were also shown images of things that were dangerous, immoral, illegal, or harmful to others. And when they did, there was activation of the prefrontal cortex. Parenting works. It turns out that kids did in fact show inhibition towards things that we teach them they should not be pursuing. But when those same images were presented simply with one icon to say that they were highly liked on a social media platform like Instagram, the prefrontal cortex activation shut off. The results clearly suggested that being exposed to imagery, ideas, facts, morals, and opinions online, when coupled with all of the online numeric indicators that are programmed into social media platforms, it's changing how adolescents' brains are responding to the information. It's changing it in a way that is reversing the very things that we've taught them before they got on social media. It's not clear yet whether that leads to changes in behavior when they get off of Instagram. That research has not yet been done. But I thought important for you to know what the research is starting to tell us so far. This particular researcher who collected this information was hired by Instagram shortly after publishing these results.
For what reason?
To improve the user experience and get people to stay on Instagram more, I believe. I'm not sure. Like I mentioned, we've been collecting a lot of data, and I wanted to show you a little bit of it that is not yet peer reviewed, but will be very, very soon. It's the biggest study that's been done to date where we were able to get an objective information about social media use in adolescents. And we were able to get information over several years. It's taken a long time. It's not really ready for prime time, but it's so relevant to what we're talking about. What we did, which is very interesting, if I asked you right now, how many minutes do you spend on your phone a day? You're going to have a guess that will be wildly off. We're all very bad at estimating that, it turns out. There is a spot on your phone, if you have an iPhone, that will tell you. And most people, when they find that screen, are horrified one way or the other at just how far off their estimates were. It will also tell you what times of day, what apps you use, how often you pick up your phone, and so on. We were able to actually get that information from a group of about 200 teens here in North Carolina, but we did it over 14 consecutive days. This took a lot of work. And we got screenshots of their actual phone use. And those screenshots told us, without lying, objective information or without bias, exactly how often they were using their phones, at what times, on what days. Also, we were able to ask them, tell us a little bit about how you're feeling in this moment. And then a few hours later, how about in this moment? And we were able to really look at this in a very, very nuanced way. What we found was that on the top, and sorry, this looks very messy, but every dot that you see is a child and their report on a particular day. And this is across all 14 days. What you can see is that what we learned is that kids on average are picking up their phones. And these were, high school kids who are in 9th and 10th grade. They're picking up their phone an average of 100 times a day. Approximately half of kids were picking up their phones less than 100 times a day. But of course, the other half were picking up their phones more than 100 times a day. And it was not uncommon at all that there were kids who were picking up their phones approximately 300 times a day. How much time do they spend on their phones? The average was 8.3 hours. The average was 8.3 hours. Remember, they're on their phones while they're eating, while they're using the restroom, while they're in class or doing their homework, while they're talking to you or should be listening to you. So those 8.5 hours a day, they're also on their phones for a long stretch of time at night. Really confirming just how much time is being spent. Once again, that's an average. There are plenty of kids who are spending approximately 1,000 hours, 1,000 minutes, forgive me, 1,000 minutes a day on their phones. So, and that might seem hard to believe until, again, you remember this is the time they should be sleeping, the time they're doing everything else. And it's not every day, but they are doing it a lot. So here's the range. You can see it right there. This is across a 14-day period. What we found is that social media, despite adolescents' reports, actually is related to increases in loneliness in the hour after they used social media. So they use social media, and then when they get off, they actually report they felt worse as a result. They feel less socially connected. They crave more social interactions. It's not clear, of course, from these results, do they crave it because they just got off and they want to be back on? Or are they craving that because whatever they just did online did not lead them to a feeling of social fulfillment? Some evidence to suggest that the latter might be true is information that I've gotten from a number of different high schools around the country with talks that I've done and work that I've done with teens, talking with them about a phenomenon referred to as Finsta. Finsta is an Instagram profile that kids develop with a fake name. I find it very ironic because Finsta is where they put their real feelings and beliefs, whereas their real Instagram profiles is where they put their curated, fake, artificial beliefs and thoughts. So it takes me a second to wrap my head around that. But on their Finsta, they say that the reason why they've developed that is because they feel incredibly detached and lonely from time they spend looking at people's real profiles. But not knowing a world where you can talk to people offline, they've created a separate way of interacting on Instagram to try and find emotional intimacy they're not finding when using the platform the way it was built. So they're using social media to fill the void that social media has created in some cases. Okay, so we've also been able to look at the extent to which the kids are picking up that phone, like we just talked about, and I showed you all those numbers. And then we scan their brains. And in this case, we were able to look at information on how much they picked up their phone from a cohort in 6th grade. And then their brains were scanned in 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. No study before has looked at whether social media use might change the development of adolescents' brains over this 3-4 year period. But in fact, that's exactly what we have found. Constantly checking phones is related to long-term changes in brain development. Without getting too technical, the results basically showed that kids who are spending more than average times picking up their phones tend to be more sensitive to any stimuli that might have to do with themselves and more sensitive to social feedback. And they are not developing the prefrontal cortex as well as others. So we're kind of creating kids who are super, super social sensitive and not able to hit the brakes on doing whatever they have to meet that sensitivity. So it's the first study that's really looked at this over this many years. It's not yet peer reviewed. Just want to be really clear about that. But it's results that we're currently writing up to really demonstrate what we're starting to see with some objective research on the effects of social media.
Does that mean that it's just going to take longer for the brain to completely develop, or is it not going to?
Well, that's a great question. We don't know. We know that that means that during these years in grades 7, 8, and 9, they are now deficient compared to their peers. So while everyone else is starting to learn inhibition skills and master them, they're not going to be able to. So they're going to be delayed at best. Now, whether the brain will accommodate for that change probably has to do with two questions. One is, well, we would love to collect data for more years and we can give you the answer. But second is, are they still going to be on social media in grades 10, 11, and 12? Because if there is a causal link between that social media usage and the brain development, we have no reason to think that the brain is going to catch up. Yeah. Of course. Oh, so sorry. Yes. No, that was a great question about whether the brain will eventually catch up. So thank you. Let me quick segue and to talking just a little bit about what you can do, because I know this is scary, but remember, some kids using some behaviors might experience difficulties. So let me just very quickly mention, if you can wait before your child begins using technology, it may be worth doing so. We see no reason why kids are experiencing deficits or problems with their social relationships if they're not getting on social media before they've reached 8th or 9th grade. In fact, I have no affiliation with Wait Until 8th, but it's a nonprofit that has started to create grassroots coalitions in school districts to get parents to sign agreements together to say, we all agree that we're not going to give our kids phones until 8th grade at the minimum. So there's no pressure. And the reason why, which I think is so clever that they're doing this, is because most parents report that the only reason why they're letting their kids do this is because they're afraid that theirs will be the only kid not getting on, and they don't want their kids to suffer the social consequences. So if everyone bands together and agrees to wait, then it takes away that pressure. I think it's very clever. There's also, of course, we as parents, we teach kids to avoid things that are risky, dangerous, things they want to do a lot more than we want them to do them. We know how to do that. Social media is another one of those things. So we might need to help them to practice moderation. Kids are going to get on social media at some point. They're going to watch their friends on it, but how can we help them to do it in a way that's not excessive, that's not overtaking, especially given that we're battling powerful brain chemistry and tens of thousands of years of evolution when we're trying to get that phone out of their hands. So we really do need to think about how we can help them to think about this in a moderation type of way. In fact, there's been some research that started to demonstrate that teaching kids mindful social media use can in fact be quite effective. And what I mean by that, this is something that adults can do too, is before they pick up their phone, to get in the habit of saying, how long would I like to use the phone for now? And what's my goal? I know sometimes I have a Zoom meeting that ends 5 minutes before the next one, and I might be tempted to get on social media, but I might say, I want to see what's in the news, and I'm going to stop in 5 minutes. And then if I found myself in a rabbit hole, I can stop and say, wait a minute, this is no longer providing me with news. And I'm no longer feeling joy. In fact, this is starting to feel like a doom scrolling situation, or I feel like I'm wasting time and I'm losing my energy. That's a signal to stop. It seems simple, but actually helping kids to engage in that practice of mindful social media use can really help them feel more control over a system that is built to keep them on for as long as possible. Let's talk to kids about digital media use. It's not a surprise that parents who do an amazing job talking with their kids about their offline social experiences generally don't do as good a job talking about online social experiences. I don't understand half of them, and I study this. So it will be really hard for me to engage in conversations about pieces of this that I don't get. So it makes perfect sense. But sometimes asking kids to be the experts in that conversation, what are you seeing? What does it mean that you're seeing that? Why did someone say like to that? Why do you think they said they liked it? Because they really liked it, or because they wanted everyone else to think that they liked it? Helping them to process that almost with you in a Socratic way can actually be really helpful for parents to learn about it, but also to show their teens that they're interested. They're not going to be judgmental about it right away, and they're going to be wanting to hear about when things happen on social media. I think that years ago when all this started, it was just too complicated to figure out. So we just kind of left kids on their own with it. I think that that might be something we want to address. Monitoring accounts might not be sufficient. The majority of kids say that their parents are actually only aware of some of their social media activities. They have more profiles than you know. Are you friends with your parents on social media? The majority say, yeah, but only on some of my accounts. So in other words, you don't know about the other accounts that they have that they're interacting on. So we can't just rely on that. No tech after 9 p.m. Might be a good suggestion. It's obviously up to every household and whatever your own family values. But again, this is the kind of thing where we're talking about sleep, we're talking about brains, we're talking about preparedness for school the next day. And again, let those kids throw you under the bus and say, it's my parents' fault. They're so mean. They won't let me be on there. But the truth is, our 20-year-olds are saying, it would have given me a really good excuse to not have to be on there. It would have actually decreased my stress level a little bit. So that's what the generation that came before is telling us. They wish that their parents did this. So many times when kids finally do get to be in person, and now as we're starting to think about taking these off and move back into the world, kids can interact in real life again, as they say, IRL. But so much when they do that, they're only spending time taking pictures to put online, and then they're all sitting around in parallel play, looking at their phones saying, someone just liked my post, someone just liked my post. What's happening is that kids are reporting a remarkably high level of social anxiety now. They don't know how to ask people out on dates. They don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to order in a restaurant, because they're used to being able to craft their messages and their interactions with great precision and multiple people helping them before they hit post. And in real life, we don't get that opportunity. So we're actually seeing a big increase in social anxiety in this generation. We have to teach kids basic social skills again. I will say that there are a variety of ways that this could be taught in schools, of course. At our center, it's called teensandtech.org. A middle school teacher joined us and wrote a whole curriculum talking about brain science, helping adolescents themselves understand this, and understand that there are multiple perspectives on every story. And the perspective of social media is their perspective, their parents' perspective, and the company's perspectives who are making this. The companies didn't make these platforms to be nice to kids. They made them for a profit. And helping kids to realize, wait a minute, if you're being encouraged to watch yet another video, why? Who's that for? Who's that benefiting? And helping them with that. This is all free. Thanks to our Family Foundation donor for this center. Everything on our website is free. If any pieces of this curriculum are helpful to you to adapt at home or to use in schools, feel free to download anything and everything you would like. And of course, there's also policy. There are many bills that are being discussed right now in the Senate. There's a bill in the House. As part of my job at the American Psychological Association, we have just sent a coalition letter with 20 different scientific societies to the Surgeon General, asking for funding for public education for parents to learn about some of this information. And there are state laws that can work too. Florida, of all states, is passing a bill to make digital media training as a required part of the curriculum for all middle school students. We could do that too in North Carolina or any other states. So let me stop there. I know I've said so much, but I know that there might be questions as well. So I'll stop and thanks. Oh, thank you.
I'll start with a question from the Q&A. If you can rephrase it.
Sure.
Thank you. The question is whether we should limit interaction with smart devices like a Google Home Hub or Amazon Alexa. Curious if listening to content like Google, Spotify, etc., which may also be after bedtime, is as addictive, or does it stimulate the same responses as screen time and social media?
Okay, so the question has to do with platforms other than personal devices and social media, but maybe household devices like your Alexa, your Google Home, and what do we know about the potential ill effects of that on child development? Is that okay? You know, I wish that we had more data on that. I can't stress enough just how new a lot of this research is and how we're just learning. In fact, we don't have very much data at all on gaming, which is another really important area. Gaming has social media built into it. We don't know a lot about that either. I would say as a parent that at least those devices, you can hear what your child is engaging in because they have to shout across the kitchen to their Alexa device, you know, what it is they want to know. So there's probably less time on that as a general rule, but we don't know, unfortunately. This is why we need so much more research. Great question, though. Thank you.
Another attendee online would love if you could pop that slide up with your books.
Oh,
And so that they can see that, take a note of those.
sure. Thank you. I've done research for many, many years on kids' likability and popularity, which became very much tied into thinking about social media, it turns out. But sorry, I'm just trying to find a way to click on that. I probably have to screen share again. Years ago, I was encouraged to write it up into something that could be useful for everybody that was non-scientific. So the book, Popular, is a summary of research on how popularity when we're in middle school and high school stays with us for the rest of our lives, and how it is part of our work lives, our romantic relationships, our friendships. And then the book was ironically popular. So we were then approached to turn it into an adolescent workbook. And that's actually just coming out in June, but we teach adolescents how to be really mindful about which kind of popularity they want to pursue, the status seeking or the actual making connections and emotional intimacy with people, and how to pick the right one. And that gets into social media as well. And that's called Likability. And that's going to be available in June. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
One more social media question, and then folks in the room can join in. In the data over the 14 days that you shared, were you able to separate out the hours used for music streaming, as this seems to be high use?
Yes, the question was whether we could look at how much of the screen time and pickups had to do with music streaming compared to other apps. We do have that data. It's so much data for all these kids, for all these time points. We're starting now to divide it into the apps, and we are doing it into categories: social media, learning, news, texting, and general communication, and music as well. It turns out that a lot of kids do listen to the music with their phones down. So that doesn't get captured as screen time. If they've got an earbud in and they're engaging in work, but they're playing the music, that doesn't count as screen time. But we haven't yet analyzed the data, you know, to look at how much they're picking up just to change the song. Yeah.
So to follow on with that,
Yeah.
And this is just a curiosity. So on your phone, you might have it set to go dark in 10 seconds or go dark in 2 minutes. So
Yep.
that might trigger how many times you pick up your phone, or you know, how long it stays on. So I was curious how much that impacts usage.
That's a great question. The question is whether your phone going dark after just a few seconds or a few minutes might influence your pickups. It absolutely would influence it. So it's a great question. The data that we have are how often they're picking it up and going straight into an app. So, so hopefully we've been able to account for some of that because they're not just checking the time or something. Because I do that too, you know, but yeah, it does pick up how much you're picking it up, and you're immediately going into your texting app, your Spotify app, your Instagram app. Yeah.
So to follow on, which is a whole nother nugget, like lots of schools over the last several years have said, you know, okay, we're a tech school, and there are plenty of public schools like, okay, we don't have iPads or computers that we can give students, but we have phones and things like that. So students are doing schoolwork some on phones. So you're looking at which apps they're using to determine are they doing schoolwork versus pleasure.
That's right. Yeah.
I say that with quotation marks.
No, the question on whether they're using tech for schoolwork, because a lot of schools are using tech and integrating that, versus for pleasure, is a great one. Yeah, we are looking at kind of more recreational use, but That's the thing. I don't think social media is going away. I don't think tech is going away. This to me really feels like helping people to understand what are the warning signs, what are the issues, what are the talking points with kids to help figure out whether they're going to be some of the kids that say, I'm not stressed. I don't see that content. It doesn't bother me. I look at it for the reasons I want to look at it. Or if someone is maybe getting a little addicted, a little sucked in, a little exposed to some dangerous things, which of course we want to avoid. So if schools are going to be giving out tech, it feels like we're coming to the point where we might have to have some big conversations about tech use, and especially how to navigate social media. There are some great platforms out there now on how to help kids preserve their anonymity when using tech. So we have a great start, but this research and the ways in which we know it interacts with adolescent brain development is not part of the conversation that's happening with most parents or most schools right now. And I think it's important.
What can you tell us about gender-specific differences that you see in adolescents and the relationship?
Yeah, the question is about gender and differences that we're seeing by gender. We're seeing that adolescents who identify as female are more likely to engage in social comparison processes. They're more likely to post full body selfies and engage in behaviors to try and get feedback on physical appearance. Males do that too, but females are doing it more and more likely to do full body. We're seeing much more friendship demands that are mediated via tech. You have to like this in time. You have to respond to my text. You left me off the group text, that kind of thing. But it would be wrong to say that this is a giant difference. The fact is, this is happening for folks of every gender identity. But some of these things, as we would expect, given the rest of society and the messages that it sends differently for people with different gender expressions, some of those things are happening more for those identifying as female. Yeah. Yes.
The wait until 8 thing. I mean, in a perfect world, would you say wait until college or when your prefrontal cortex is finally developed? I mean,
Yeah, the question is, why wait till 8th? Yeah, why not wait until 40? So, yeah,
I mean, if you know, so just like if you know something is very, very unhealthy, like,
Yep.
Are you going to feed your kid, a 12-pack of beer at 16? We know that's bad. We know this is bad.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like I could answer that as a parent and as a scientist, and they're right now tugging war at each other right now in a really hard way. So let me be as genuine and transparent as I can with you. As a scientist, I don't know. I don't know the answer yet. I don't know that waiting till 8 versus 10th versus when they're 21. I don't have the answer to be able to give you an exact number. As a parent, my kids are asking. They're asking right now. They're about to turn 10 and 12, and they're not getting it. And if they sell flip phones, I might go for that at first before I go for a smartphone, just because I want to be, once they're outside of adult supervision, I want to be able to contact them for safety. I don't know if that exists anymore, to be able to do that. So they're going to get on. I'm taking it away at night. I'm talking with them about it very frequently. I'm already talking with them about it. They're watching my behavior. They see when I have to answer something that takes me into a social media platform, and we're taking that opportunity now to say, let me tell you why I'm using this. It's a great way for me to contact people I don't know their emails. It's a fun thing to do when I have 5 minutes and I use mindful social media use, and really trying to teach them the right habits. So would I keep them off until college? I can't answer scientifically. And I have a feeling that, it's just going to be too hard to engage in today's society without any of it. But I'm really wrestling with that myself. It's a great question.
It's interesting. We have twins and kept them off the 9th grade, and just seeing the two of them and the way they handle it are 180 degrees of difference. So when you were talking about each individual and the multiplication of how it works, you just would say it can be so individual, I think, regardless of when they get started.
I think you're right. Your point about individual differences is so important, and how different kids are going to respond in different ways. The one thing that I'll say, which is actually what I've talked about in my work on popularity, is that we're being really, really careful not to make a big deal with the kids if we ever do engage, we suddenly get lots of likes or lots of feedback. We do not want to send the message that the goal of life is to get lots of likes, to get lots of followers. That's very, very important to my wife and I. Making a real connection with a human being in an emotionally intimate way, that's what we want for our kids. And if they see us celebrate, oh my God, my thing went viral, what message is that sending? So we're very careful about trying to emphasize the ways to use these platforms to foster the kind of social relationships we think matter. Yes.
And trying to mimic some of the things that we've seen in place for kids. I'm just curious, is there data about like our age group? Do you use dementia sooner or in regards to misuse, or have they associated effects? The use of these smartphones, it just seems like we rely so much on it, for we, in the older population.
Yeah, the question is whether any of the things that we talked about with the adolescents and young adults might apply to people that are a little bit older adults, or even getting into more of an older age population. Yeah, if TikTok for 2 hours doesn't cause dementia, I don't know what does. So I'll say that for, at first, but we don't have a lot of information on that in older populations. We know that what platforms people use varies very much by what age cohort you're in. So Pinterest, LinkedIn, is much more the kind of 40, 50 and up, and Facebook still. Grandparents know how to use Facebook, and that's where they share their, their pictures of their grandkids. But it's very stratified that way. The research that I'm familiar with the older populations has to do with the blue light from our screens and how much it disrupts our sleep. So if you use social media, or really any device, even if you're reading the news or watching a show, if you're using it right before going to sleep, it's really going to disrupt your sleep. And that has health effects. So there's a lot of talk of either wearing those amber glasses, those blue blockers, when you're looking at the computer in bed, or keeping it far away from where you're going to spend that last half an hour before you drift off to sleep. Yeah.
Got a couple more questions from the Q&A and chat, and then maybe if there's any last questions, then we'll let Dr. Prinstein finish. These two questions. The first is there data around teens that are involved in structured after-school activities versus teens who are not, in terms of, I guess, the hours of usage, I imagine?
Yeah, the question, do structured after-school activities help reduce screen usage? Absolutely. Yeah, anything we can do to get kids interacting in real life is going to be really powerful and important.
Great. And the other question here is someone asking if the content can be shared with kids. So I guess your thought on us maybe sharing these slides with our kids, any suggestions on ages, or how you feel we should share this with our kids?
Yeah, the question is, can any of this be shared with kids, any of the content? Absolutely. I think that, middle school and adolescents and high school adolescents are very smart. They know much more about this than we do. They know what the experience is viscerally of being on these platforms. The curriculum was developed to try and make it very fun and easy for kids to digest and understand. But whether that's a useful resource for you, or a copy of these slides, or anything at all, please feel free to share. There's nothing here that kids shouldn't be actively involved in the discussion on, I think.
Yeah. Follow up on that. Well, listening to that, I'm like, this is great. But as my 11th grader once told me, boy, I wish somebody else had told me, because I come from you, I see you now.
Yeah.
And so I think there's so much power in somebody other than parents. It's really important for parents to get this information, and the school curriculum also surrounds that message, because it just is like blah 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 from
Yeah, the point is that getting the information from someone other than a parent might be even more impactful than hearing, another lesson from parents. Yeah, that's great. We actually started to play around with getting some of our undergraduate students to record video messages to middle school students to try and convey that. Turns out it's a little bit complicated to get a really good quality version of that, but if there's ever interest in collaborations or ways of thinking about how to do that in a fun, creative way. My kids go to an independent school on my side of the triangle, and it's just the kind of thing that would feel like a project-based learning kind of, opportunity for kids to get involved in. So yeah, always happy. We have an adolescent panel of teen experts that guide us in the work that we do, and I think they would agree with your comment perfectly.
And some of that feedback, when you said that, it was mainly surveys with your students. Were there any videos where they say, "Oh, I wish my parents waited. This is the impact of that"? 'Cause that would probably be powerful.
Yeah.
More so than me.
Yeah, absolutely. The question is, do we have any videos of teenagers or young adults saying, "I wish that this is what I knew when I was 12"? I think we're working on some. It turns out that undergraduates aren't all perfect on camera. So we ask them to get on there, they kind of freeze up, it gets really awkward, and we're like, eh. So we got to figure out a way to produce a video that's going to be compelling, because we know that that's how to do it, but that starts to get beyond our job as scientists and into like movie directing. So we tend to at some point say, oh, let's just stick to the data. That's what we know. But you're right. I mean, I'd love to find partners to be able to do a good job with that. It's just not our forte as a bunch of geeky scientists. Yeah. Yeah.
You might do 5 minutes and then do something else. Like for class, but then it's not. And then I don't release that. And I feel like I come up right over these days. That's not going to be good for you. Like you that focus, right? Like how homework seems like it's a very, very long time. Like how much time is in your homework? But I kind of bet that there's some other stuff that's all interlaced in there. And it's not purely like you do math. It's like, I don't know what, like maybe 5-10 minutes that you graph. Next thing, you're looking at some little TikTok and then you go back. And it's those little moments that keep getting interspersed. I think everything has a chat function. Yeah.
Right.
We're all talking to something. I look at some of those conversations and it's not all about.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I could point to, if you had something to say, I said, that's not healthy, or like, that's not good.
Yeah, the question is, when social media use is interspersed with actual homework and everything, and there's the occasional watching a video, the occasional doing a chat, it's so hard to police and it's so hard to stop when it works that way. Absolutely. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I think there's no one right answer. I think that some ideas could be to have your kids try an experiment. How quickly can you get through your homework if you don't log in? Resist the urge, just plow through it. Do you feel like you were able to concentrate longer and actually get the work done and get more right answers? Or, you got it done faster because you weren't distracting yourself every 5 minutes. Maybe for some kids, it's going to be a reward system. Let's set the clock. When it hits 15 minutes of you doing work, you can do whatever you want for 5 minutes on on TikTok, and then you got to go back. Maybe for some kids, it's a matter of doing it with them one day and sitting, which is so hard, I realize, but sitting alongside them and being like, let me see, show me, and let me learn. And maybe your presence is enough for kids to self-monitor, and realize like, oh, yeah, I'm tempted to, but I know I don't have to. And so maybe I'll just stick to the homework now. But I think every kid and every family is gonna be a different way. But I think that for so many of us, we have lost awareness of it. It's like stress eating. It's like so many things that we all do that we don't even realize we're doing it until you look down and you're like, where did all those cookies go? The whole sleeve is gone, and I think that's what's happening with kids. We've trained them to have this automatic way of engaging with a computer. I don't even think they realize they're doing it as much as they are. And I think that seems like the first step is just to create the awareness that I want to take some responsibility of how I'm spending my own time.
My question was related to that. Sort of scared me when you were talking about tests, and then you become like, you don't respond quick enough, you're not part of the angle, like that angle of it.
Yep.
And I want to now form an organization or something that's instead of wait till 8, like somehow break that cycle, because we're just I'm a 6th grader and I'm just beginning of this.
Well, your question is how can we change the culture and the values around, it's cool to not be on social media, or, how do you not suffer the saddest consequences of being off social media or something? Do you remember Students Against Drunk Driving? How amazing that the idea of a designated driver in one year, what might have been the geekiest thing you could possibly imagine somebody saying at a party. And now it's a source of pride for someone to say, I'm going to do this. We can change kids' values on things. We can. Our class, students after our class developed on campus Students for Humane Technology. I've never taught an undergraduate class where the students created a club to continue the material after the class was over. It was amazing. And it's not a testament to me or the class or anything like that. It's how much they care about this topic. It's how much they see their own time being taken away and being used for profit. And kids are efficacious. I think that middle schools could have a club where they talk about it. I think high schools could take responsibility and set their own norms. It's cool to go to sleep and get good sleep so the next day you can perform well at sports, or you can look your best, or whatever the value is at that school. There's something about getting offline that people can get behind. But we have to be clever about that in each and every community, and we have to get teens involved. As everyone's saying, it's not going to be us lecturing to them. It's about them making this choice for themselves.
Thank you. That's a great note to end up with. Thank
Okay.
you for your
Thank you.
generosity, your time.
Sure.
Thank you all for coming out in the rain. This was wonderful, and we really appreciate you being here, Dr. Prinstein.
Sure. Thank you all. Nice to meet you.